Here's something nobody has talked about. Not the fact that Sheikh Hamdan's marriage ended. Everyone knows that. Not the poems, or the departure, or the attempts at reconciliation that followed. The fact that he knew, before she left, before the final conversation, before the palace went quiet with her absence, he knew, not in the way of someone who has been told, not because of a dramatic revelation, but in the way that people who are truly paying attention always know, quietly, uncomfortably, in the space between what they hope is true and what they can see is actually true. Sheikh Hamdan is a poet. He is, by the nature of that identity, a man who pays extremely close attention to what is real. And the reality of his marriage, its direction, its weight, the slow shift in its foundations, was visible to him long before it became visible to anyone else. Today, we look at the 5 signs, the 5 moments, each one documented in his poetry, in his public behavior, in the pattern of what he did and did not do, that show us he saw what was coming before it arrived. And we ask the question that nobody asks. If he knew, why did he not stop it? To understand why Sheikh Hamdan saw these signs and what seeing them meant for a man in his position, we need to briefly understand something about how he processes the world. Fazza is not a man who deceives himself. His poetry, hundreds of verses spanning years, reveals a man of unusual self-awareness. He does not write to pretend things are other than they are. He writes to acknowledge what is, even when what is painful. Even when acknowledging it publicly creates complications that a more politically cautious man would have avoided. This means that as his second marriage moved through its difficult months, as the signs accumulated one by one, he was not unaware. He was, in fact, acutely aware. The question was never whether he saw it coming. The question was what a man like him, a poet, a prince, a person caught between worlds, does with that knowledge when he has it. We will answer that at the end. First, the 5 signs. In the early period of his second marriage, Sheikh Hamdan's poetry had a different quality. It was still complex, still layered, but there was a present tense warmth to some of it, a sense of a man who was genuinely invested in the life he was building. As the months of 2022 progressed, that quality disappeared. The poems became retrospective, looking backward rather than forward. The long they described was not for something he was moving toward, it was for something that had already been. What it meant a poet writes toward what his heart is oriented to. When the orientation shifts, when the poems stop pointing toward the present and start pointing toward the past, the poet knows it before anyone else does. The shift in his poetic voice was not a stylistic choice. It was a report from his interior world. The Prof. By spring 2022, every major poem he published was unmistakably about a love that predated his second marriage. He was not writing about a future with his second wife. He had in his poetry already moved elsewhere. When Sheikh Mohammed suggested, gently as fatherly wisdom, that Hamdan should visit Sheikha in London, Hamdan agreed. Quickly, without the kind of careful deliberation that a man would bring to a decision he understood to be complicated for his current marriage. What? It meant a man who believes his marriage is solid, who is fully invested in protecting it, hesitates before agreeing to visit a former love. He weighs the impact. He considers his current wife's feelings. He at minimum has a serious conversation with her before committing. Hamdan's readiness to go. The lack of visible conflict about the decision suggests that some part of him already knew his marriage could not be made more fragile by this trip than it already was. The proof: he went to London, he came back, changed in a way that his second wife felt immediately. The trip did not create the problem. His willingness to go revealed that he already understood, on some level, what the problem was. The sign, the June 2022 poem, the one that went viral, that Shaker responded to, that confirmed for his second wife what she had been trying not to conclude, was published without any apparent consideration of what it would communicate to the woman he was married to. He was not posted carelessly. Sheikh Hamdan is never careless with his words. He was posted with the particular deliberateness of a man who has decided at some level to let the truth be visible. What it meant you do not publish a poem of that emotional specificity, a poem so clearly about a love that is not your current wife, without understanding what you are doing. A man fully committed to protecting his marriage edits himself. He considers the impact. At minimum, he chooses different imagery, softer language, more ambiguity. Hamdan chose none of those things. The poem said what it said, clearly and without softening. That is the choice of a man who has already accepted a certain reality. The proof, he posted it. He knew she would read it. He knew the world would understand it. He published it anyway. That single decision contains, within it, his acknowledgement that the marriage was already where it was already going. After his second wife left, Sheikh Hamdan made 4 attempts to reach her. All of them failed, and we have covered why in a previous video. But here is something about those attempts that reveals his understanding of the situation. Not one of them offered something genuinely new. The poems were moving, but they were still poems. The intermediaries were respected, but there was still formality. The private message was personal, but it was still words on a screen. What it meant if you know, deep down, that what broke something was a pattern, that the fundamental problem is not a specific event, but a structural truth about yourself. Then your attempts at repair will reflect that knowledge. They will be sincere but contained, genuine but somehow not quite large enough. The attempts of a man who is trying because trying is right, but who understands underneath the trying that the thing being tried for may not be possible. The PRO 4 attempts, all within his existing range, none of them required him to be fundamentally different than he had always been. That is not the behavior of a man who believes the problem can be solved with enough effort. That is the behavior of a man who has already accepted somewhere in himself what the answer is going to be. This is the most revealing sign of all, because it came after the departure and it shows us what he had already made peace with before she left. The poems Sheikh Hamdan wrote in the months following his second wife's departure did not read like the poetry of a man who was surprised. They did not have the raw, disoriented quality of someone encountering an unexpected loss. They had a different quality, the weight of a man who had known something was coming and had been quietly, privately preparing to carry it. What immense surprise produces a particular kind of grief, scattered, searching, unable to find its form. Expected loss produces something different, a sorrow that knows its own shape. Hamdan's post-departure poetry knew its shape. It was heavy with regret, but not with shock. It asked for forgiveness, but not for explanation. It mourned, but with the particular stillness of someone who had been mourning quietly for some time before the formal ending arrived. The proof his verse from this period reads like the continuation of a conversation he had already been having with himself, not the beginning of a new one. He had known, he had been preparing, and his poetry, as always, tells the truth that his position would not let him speak aloud. We promised at the beginning to answer this question. Here it is. If Sheikh Hamdan saw the signs, if he knew before she left where things were going, why did he not do something different? Why did he not change direction before the departure rather than after it? There are 3 honest answers. The first, because he could not give her what she needed. She needed an undivided heart. He did not have one to give. Not because he did not want to, but because the division in his heart was not something he could resolve by deciding to resolve it. Feelings of that depth do not respond to willpower. He knew what she needed. He could not provide it. And knowing you cannot give someone what they need is its own form of understanding that the ending is coming. The second, because he is a poet before he is a strategist. A strategist, seeing the signs, makes calculated moves to change the trajectory. A poet, a real one, a person whose relationship to truth is more important than comfort, does not suppress what he knows. He writes it. He releases it. He lets the truth be visible, even when visibility is costly. Hamdan's decision to publish the June poem was not a strategic failure. It was a poetic inevitability. He could not write it, and he could not write it and keep it private. That is who he is. The third, because on some level he understood that she deserved the truth. He could not give her what she needed, but he could give her the one thing that would allow her to choose herself. Honesty, even encoded in verse, even released into the world rather than spoken directly, even at the cost of everything that followed. He saw the signs, he could not change them, so he let her see them too. 5 signs, visible to anyone who was paying the kind of attention he was paying. A marriage ending not in a single moment of decision, but in a slow accumulation of acknowledged truths, each one pointing in the same direction, each one confirming what the previous one had suggested. Sheikh Hamdan is, in this reading of the story, not simply a man who failed to protect his marriage. He is a man who saw what was true and who, unable to change it, chose honesty over pretense, chose to let his second wife see what he could see, chose to write the truth rather than manage a comfortable fiction. Whether that makes him admirable or tragic or both, I will leave that for you to decide. What I know is that the signs were there, and he saw them, and he did not look away. If this video gave you a new understanding of this story, a new way of reading what he did and why, please share it with someone who has been following along. Subscribe if you are not already here. I will see you in the next one.